The sun had not yet climbed clear of the broken mesas when the auctioneer's hammer struck wood, and the sound cracked across red silt crossing like a rifle shot. Dust hung low in the morning air, stirred by hooves and boots and the restless shuffling of a gathered town that had learned to watch misery as if it were sport. The rail yard platform served most days for cattle tallies and freight exchanges. Today it bore a single wooden chair, a ledger table, and a woman standing alone with her wrists loosely bound in front of her. More ceremony than necessity, she stared past the men bidding on her, past their hats tipped low and their voices clipped with tobacco and profit, toward the thin silver line of desert stretching east where the land looked honest because it held nothing. 225, called a voice thick with whiskey and impatience. 250, came another, the auctioneer Caleb. Drum wiped his upper lip with a kerchief already stained with sweat and dust. Fine stock. 26 years, good health. House-trained, cook, seamstress, capable with livestock. The woman did not react. Her dark hair had been braided once, but the wind had already loosened strands across her cheek. One eye showed a faint purple bloom beneath it, days old and turning. Yellow, a horse snorted near the hitch rail where a lone rider had stopped but not dismounted. The animal was a dun gelding, lean and scarred along the flank from some forgotten fight with barbed wire or bad men. The rider sat still, gloved hands, resting atop the saddle horn. His hat brim cut the sun from his face, leaving only his jaw visible, rough, unshaven, marked by a white seam of old scar running from ear to chin. No one noticed him. That was the way he traveled. 300, said Sheriff Harlan Pike, without raising his voice. He stood near the front, coat unbuttoned despite the chill that still clung to the morning. His badge caught the light in brief, sharp flashes. 2 deputies flanked him like barnacles on a hull. A murmur passed through. The Watchers. Pike owned half the cattle routes running north. What he didn't own, he taxed. The auctioneer brightened. $300, fine gentlemen. Do I hear 320? Silence settled like drifting ash. The woman's fingers curled slightly at the rope binding them. Her eyes flicked once toward Pike and away again like a horse scenting a storm. It cannot outrun. The rider at the hitch rail slid from his saddle with the quiet economy of someone who had lived too long on uncertain ground. He tied off the reins loosely and stepped forward, boots whispering against the planks of the platform ramp. 320. He said. Heads turned. The man did not look at the crowd. He looked at the woman, though not in any bold or reassuring way. More as one might regard a horizon. While calculating distance and cost, Pike's lips parted in a smile that never reached his eyes. Didn't see you come in, stranger. The cowboy said nothing. 350, Pike answered. The auctioneer's hammer hovered mid-air. Trembling with opportunity, the cowboy reached into his coat and drew out a folded packet of bills bound with twine. He did not count them. He laid them on the ledger table with a soft, final sound. 400, he said. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of livestock, hot iron, and the faint sweetness of mesquite smoke from the far end of town. Pike stared at the money, then at the man. That's a steep charity. The cowboy's gaze remained fixed on the woman, not charity. Something moved behind Pike's expression, something calculating and annoyed. He spat into the dust. Sold, Drum barked quickly, bringing the hammer down before Pike could gather a new number from his pride. The rope around the woman's wrists was cut. She did not step forward or back. She simply waited. The cowboy gathered the remaining length of rope from her hands and let it drop. He gestured toward his horse with a tilt of his chin. You ride? He asked. Her voice came low, scraped thin. Yes. They left without ceremony. The town resumed its breathing, its trading, its easy digestion of cruelty. Only Sheriff Pike watched them until the dust swallowed horse and riders whole. They rode east for an hour before either spoke. The desert rolled open in wide pale, sheets broken by creosote and scattered boulders bleached by decades of sun. Heat rose early, shimmering low across the flats. My name is Eliza Ward, she said at last, her voice uncertain as though testing whether it still belonged to her. The cowboy nodded once. Jonah Rook. She studied his back, the squared shoulders that carried no visible weapon beyond the revolver riding low at his hip and the rifle sheathed along the saddle scabbard. "Why?" she asked. Jonah did not turn. "Because I had the money." "That isn't reason." "No," he said, "it isn't." She waited. The horse hooves drummed softly against the hardpan, steady as a heartbeat. "You got kin?" he asked. "No." "Somewhere you're aiming to go?" She swallowed. "Anywhere Sheriff Pike isn't." Jonah absorbed that, the name settling like grit beneath the tongue. "There's a ranch 2 days south," he said. "Owned by a widow named Clara Boone. She hires hands when she can. Pays fair, keeps her word." Eliza nodded, though he could not see it. "You're not taking me there for work you expect back?" "No." The answer arrived clean and unornamented. She studied him again, searching for corners or hidden barbs. Found none she could name, which unsettled her more. "You from around here, Jonah Rook?" He did not reply for a long time. "I was," he said finally. They camped beside a dry arroyo that night. Jonah built a small fire and set beans to warm, while Eliza cleaned a dented tin cup with sand and a rag from his saddle roll. The stars opened overhead like scattered bone fragments across a velvet sky. She watched him move, precise, measured, never wasting gesture or breath. His hands bore scars older than most roads she'd traveled. "You ever been married?" she asked. The question seemed to land somewhere behind his eyes. He stirred the beans without answering. The silence stretched until she almost apologized. "Yes." He said, "Where is she now?" "Buried." Eliza nodded. She did not ask more. They ate in quiet. Coyotes called from distant hills, their voices thin and lonely. Later, as she settled into her borrowed blanket roll, she heard him speaking softly to the horse, voice low and patient, like a man reminding himself how to remain gentle in a world that kept forgetting the language. On the second afternoon they crossed a shallow wash where water still lingered in pockets from winter rain. Jonah dismounted to let the horses drink. Eliza followed, crouching beside the water, washing dust from her face. "You don't ask much," she said, glancing toward him. "I ask what matters." "And what matters to you?" He leaned against a rock, eyes tracing the horizon as if reading a story only he could see. "Making it through another day without adding weight I can't carry." She studied him, the words lodging somewhere deep and unspoken inside her. "You think saving me adds weight?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "I think everything does," he said. They reached Boone Ranch by sunset on the third day. The land spread broad and stubborn beneath wind-worn hills, cattle grazing in scattered clusters. The ranch house stood whitewashed and weather-beaten, smoke curling from the chimney. Clara Boone greeted them with a shotgun cradled easily in her arms, her gray hair tied in a practical knot. "You look like trouble," she told Jonah. "Not today," he answered. "She," eyed Eliza, taking in the fading bruise, the cautious posture. "You need work?" Clara asked her. "Yes, ma'am." Clara lowered the shotgun. "Then you can start by helping me chase a heifer that thinks fences are opinions." Eliza almost smiled. For 2 weeks, life settled into a fragile rhythm. Eliza learned the routines of the ranch, rising before dawn, cooking for hands, mending tack, gradually standing straighter as bruises faded into memory. Clara watched her with the sharp kindness of someone who knew the cost of survival. Jonah stayed longer than he intended. He helped repair a collapsed windmill, rode fence lines, spoke little. At night he sat apart from the bunkhouse laughter, carving small shapes from scrap wood with a narrow blade. One evening, Eliza approached him as he worked beneath the fading glow of lantern light. "What do you carve?" she asked. He held out the figure. A small wooden horse, carefully shaped, smooth along the neck. "My son liked them," he said. The air stilled. "Liked?" she asked. Jonah's thumb brushed the carving's mane. "He didn't live long." She sat beside him without asking permission. The silence between them felt less like absence and more like shared weather. "You didn't save me because of money," she said softly. He shook his head once. "You remind me," he said, "of someone who didn't get saved." Sheriff Pike. Arrived on the 15th morning. Dust rose ahead of 3 riders approaching the ranch gate. Clara spotted them first, her mouth tightening around a curse that tasted older than the hills. Jonah stood from the corral where he'd been checking. A lame steer. His hand hovered near his revolver but did not settle there. Pike dismounted slowly, surveying the property with casual ownership. His deputies fanned out behind him. "You bought stolen property, Boone," Pike announced. Clara spat into the dirt. "She ain't property." "Law says otherwise," Pike replied, producing a folded document. "Indenture transfer." Signed legal. Eliza stepped from the bunkhouse doorway, her face pale but steady. "I'm not going back," she said. Pike's smile returned, thin as wire. "You don't choose, girl." Jonah walked forward, boots crunching softly against gravel. "She does now," he said. Pike studied him with recognition dawning slow and unpleasant. "Rook, thought you were dead or drunk somewhere south." "Neither. You always did like fixing things that weren't yours." The deputy shifted, hands resting close to their holsters. Ranch hands gathered near the barn, tension thick as summer lightning. Pike unfolded another paper. "This woman was sold to repay her husband's debts. Husband signed contract before his unfortunate passing." Eliza's breath caught. Jonah turned toward her slightly. "That true?" Her eyes shimmered but did not break. "He signed it after they beat him half to death for missing cattle payments. He didn't know what he was signing." Pike shrugged. "Signature's legal." Clara's shotgun clicked as she cocked it open and closed again, slow and deliberate. "You planning to take her by force, Sheriff?" she asked. "If necessary." Silence fell heavy, absolute. Jonah stepped forward until he stood within arm's reach of Pike. "How much?" he asked. Pike blinked. "What?" "The debt." "How much to settle it?" Pike studied him, amusement creeping across his face. "It's grown since the auction. Interest, fees, trouble you've caused." Jonah waited. $800. Pike said finally, voice oily with satisfaction. Clara cursed under her breath. The sum might as well have been the moon. Jonah removed his hat, dusted it once against his thigh, then set it back on his head. "I don't have that." Pike's smile widened. "Then we're finished here." Eliza stepped forward suddenly. "I'll go." "No," Jonah said. She looked at him, eyes fierce through unshed tears. "You've done enough." He stared at her for a long moment, something raw flickering behind the scar that split his face. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "That's not." "Why?" he said. He turned back to Pike. "I'll ride with you," Jonah said. "Work off the debt. Ranch security. Escort routes. Whatever you name." Pike laughed, sharp and delighted. "You think I want you near my operations?" "You want the money," Jonah said. "I can earn it faster than she can being sold from house to house." The sheriff considered, eyes narrowing. "You got a reputation for finishing jobs," Pike admitted. "And for not talking?" Jonah said nothing. 3 months, Pike said. "You ride for me? Debt cleared after?" Clara stepped forward, anger burning in her voice. "You can't trust." "Him, I don't," Pike replied. "That's why I'll keep him close." Eliza's hands trembled at her sides. "Jonah, don't." He did not look at her. 3 months, he repeated. Pike extended his hand. Jonah ignored it and walked toward his horse. The work Pike gave him was blood-stained from the beginning. Jonah escorted supply caravans that carried more whiskey and rifles than grain. He rode shotgun on cattle drives that skimmed dangerously close to land Pike meant to seize from smaller ranchers. He watched men beaten for resisting fabricated taxes. He did not intervene. Each night he counted the days with small notches carved into his saddle pommel, silent tallies of debt and endurance. Eliza remained at Boone Ranch, working, waiting, carrying a guilt that hollowed her chest each dawn she woke without him there. Clara watched her like a storm watcher reading the sky. "You can't save a man who's already choosing his road," Clara told her once. "I'm not trying to save him," Eliza said. "Then what are you trying to do?" Eliza stared toward the southern horizon where dust sometimes rose like ghosts. "Be worth the choice he made." 2 months into the arrangement, Jonah learned Pike's real enterprise. It came during a night escort run when Pike's men stopped a wagon train carrying immigrant families heading west. The sheriff produced forged warrants claiming unpaid tariffs. When the settlers protested, deputies dragged a young woman from one of the wagons, threatening to sell her as collateral. Jonah felt the world tilt beneath his boots, memory colliding with present until time folded in on itself. His wife's face surfaced in his mind, pale, frightened, clutching their feverish child while men tore through their homestead searching for taxes they could not pay. He had been away driving cattle. By the time he returned, the house was burned, the graves shallow and fresh. He had buried them alone under a cottonwood that died 2 winters later. The deputy shoved the settler girl toward Pike. Jonah's hand moved before thought finished forming. He caught her arm, pulling her back behind him. "That ain't part of the contract," he said. Pike's expression darkened. "You don't decide contract terms." Jonah's gaze hardened. "You said escort, security, not trafficking." "Everything I do is law," Pike snapped. The other deputies reached for their guns. Wind dragged dust between them like drawn curtains. Jonah released the girl slowly. She stumbled back toward her family, sobbing. "Finish the escort," Pike said coldly. "We'll discuss your employment after." Jonah rode the remainder of the night in silence, so dense it felt like drowning. He returned to Red Silk Crossing at dawn 3 days later with the final ledger marking his debt nearly cleared. He dismounted outside Pike's office, saddle pommel bearing 88 carved notches. Inside, Pike poured whiskey into 2 glasses. "2 days left," he said. "You've been useful." Jonah removed his hat. "Debt's done." "Not yet." Pike slid a document across the desk. Jonah read it once. Then again, it was Eliza's indenture transfer amended. Debt extended under newly fabricated ranch damages allegedly caused during her stay with Clara Boone. "You lied," Jonah said. Quietly, Pike shrugged. "I adjust circumstances." Jonah folded, took a long breath. The room smelled of whiskey and oiled leather and rot disguised as authority. "There ain't enough months in the world for you to settle what you owe," Pike added softly. "Some people are born to be owned." Jonah folded the paper with deliberate care. "No," he said. "They ain't." Pike's hand drifted toward his revolver. Jonah's was already there. The gunshot inside the office sounded muffled like a slammed door. Pike staggered backward, shock blooming across his chest in dark red silence. He fell against the desk, scattering papers like startled birds. Deputies burst through the doorway. Jonah fired once more, disarming one, the other freezing mid-draw as realization replaced bravado. "Walk," Jonah told him. The deputy walked. By the time Jonah reached Boone Ranch again, blood had dried stiff across his sleeve and the sky burned low with evening fire. Eliza ran to meet him halfway across the yard, stopping short when she saw the crimson spread across his coat. "It's done," he said. She stared at him, searching for words large enough to hold what stood between them. None came. "You're going to hang for this," Clara said from the porch, voice thick with grim respect. "Yes," Jonah answered. Eliza's breath shattered. "No, we can leave. Ride west, Mexico, anywhere." He shook his head. "They'll come for the ranch." "For you. This ends if I stand and finish it." She gripped his coat, fingers curling into dried blood. "I can't give you anything in return for this. Not a name. Not a family. I cannot give you a child or a future or any promise worth the price you're paying." His face broke then, the first fracture she had ever seen. His eyes closed, as if bracing against wind that might tear him apart from within. "I know," he whispered. Tears slid silently down her face. "Then why?" He reached up, hesitated, then rested his scarred hand against her cheek with an awkward tenderness that felt more honest than practiced grace. "Because you get to live without bowing your head," he said. "That's enough to bury a man." Proper, they took him to Red Silk Crossing in chains at sunrise 2 days later. Townsfolk gathered again, drawn by the same appetite that had watched her auction weeks before. Eliza stood near the front, Clara beside her, both silent as stone markers. Jonah walked to the gallows with steady steps, dust rising around his boots like memory trying to follow. He did not look for her. He knew where she stood by the weight. In the air, the noose slipped around his neck. The preacher asked if he wished to speak. Jonah considered. The sun climbed. Wind rattled loose boards along the rail platform. "No," he said. The trapdoor dropped. Months later, Boone Ranch prospered in a quiet, stubborn way. Eliza ran the books, the kitchens, and eventually the livestock contracts when Clara's eyesight dimmed with age. In the bunkhouse, on a small shelf beside her bed, sat a carved wooden horse smoothed by countless nights of her thumb tracing its worn mane. Sometimes when wind moved across the pasture just right, it carried the distant rhythm of hooves that were not there, and she would pause, standing very still, her face lifted toward the horizon where the desert stretched open and honest and unbound. She never remarried, never left the ranch. She spoke Jonah's name only once each year when the cottonwood sapling they planted near the south fence dropped its leaves in slow golden surrender to autumn dust. And every year she left beneath that tree a small bundle of fresh wildflowers, tied with faded twine, set carefully in the earth as though returning something borrowed and never forgotten.